Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Julia Small. Welcome to the show, Julia. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So, listeners, you may remember Julia. She was on a show that we did with some of the people a couple of months ago in the summer, July time, I think it was. But this is a one-hander. It's just me and Julia here today. So, what comes to your mind when you hear this the name of the podcast, Julia?
Yeah. So I love the name of this podcast, The Thriving Adoptees. It makes me think of people feeling empowered and feeling connected. And, for me and my journey, I think that what has helped me thrive a lot is finding this community of other adoptees and just seeing how other people have had similar experiences as I have and not feeling alone in those.
Yeah, because we hear this so often, don't we? So we've been disconnected from that community. We've been alone. We've been alone with our thoughts and our feelings, and we've thought that we're going a little bit mad, right? And then we come into community and we realize that what do people say? They say we're having a normal reaction to an abnormal experience, and this kind of normalizes our whole experience. And obviously there's the layers that make that different. So as a transracial adoptee, I'm thinking maybe have you spent a lot of time in community with other transracial adoptees? Has that been where you found your people?
Yeah, so a little bit more. As I've gotten older, I've started, building more connections like through this podcast and through some of the writing I've done and some of the advocacy work. But really, a lot of the connections that I felt were just reading people's stories online, reading them in books. I think I kind of discovered this journey a little bit later in life, in my late 20s, which seems like in general is around when people discover it, but it did feel a little bit late to almost be forming this identity of mine. When you form a lot of identities when you're younger. So I felt like I needed to take things a little bit slower. It was a little bit tough for me to kind of reflect back on some of the things I thought that were just me just feeling out of place or being a little bit awkward or weird. And, I look back and I'm like, you know what? It was kind of hard growing up in a pretty homogenous, pretty white community and being one of the few people of color on top of that also being adopted. So I think seeing representation of that in media and reading about it in books and people's personal stories that they've been very brave to share, that has really helped me a lot.
Yeah. So interesting. You mentioned this word representation because I don't know whether this is happening in the US, but here in the UK, we've had basically everybody that's been in TV adverts for many, many decades has been white. But now it seems to have gone flipped. They've actually gone that it's more like virtual signaling, and now it's like when I see an advert with a white person and I think, white, a mix of different people, I think, oh, that's fantastic, because otherwise we're waiting and it seems a little bit forced to me that people are doing this. They've almost gone too far the other way. But I was saying to my wife the other night, I need to ask somebody about this. Do people? Am I coming from like white privilege when I'm saying that, or do people of color feel more empowered when they see a mix?
Yeah, I definitely think I feel more empowered seeing more people who look like me. It might almost feel like if you're white and not seeing as many people who look like you feel a little bit shocking because it's not what it has been in the past. But for someone who is not white, I think that in the past, it was maybe not shocking to see no one that didn't look like me, but it's definitely shocking once you start seeing people that look like you and realizing, wait, that's kind of strange. Why have I never seen an Asian American, Eastern Asian American woman in the lead romance role? Why have they always been like a side character? Why have they always been like this tropey kind of nerdy Asian portrayal, and there's not this wider diversity being portrayed? And I think that it certainly does feel really empowering to have more representation, not feel like stigmatized into this one role that everyone thinks you should be in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess I could ask the question a slightly different way. It seems almost put on, forced by they're being tokenistic there.
Oh, I see.
The companies are just trying too hard.
And
And I'm wondering whether that's because that's just me saying it that way. Whether do you feel that they're trying too hard? When is it tokenism, or again, is it just my white privilege coming to say something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there are different companies in general who tokenize and kind of exploit the stories and the people of color for different reasons. But at the same time, I think that when you have generations of this hierarchy where white people tend to be the dominant figures, you have to actively make efforts to kind of change that. So it's a fine balance. It's really hard. You can't have like a great example is when companies will say that they support Black Lives Matter, but then they donate to all of these anti Black or anti people of color organizations, or they don't have their leadership board looks all homogenous and white. So it's that fine line of, if you are going to make these efforts, then they need to be made everywhere. It can't just be this one thing where you hire one Black actor, actress, or one Asian actor, actress. You need to really stick firm to these beliefs.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can see that I've perhaps been a little bit blanket on my. I appreciate that I've been a bit blanket on my view on this. I can see the nuance that you're adding to this.
Yeah, it's certainly complex. So
you're saying really it's more about we should be aware of a general look at of what the company's doing across the board, rather than me judging them for being just tokenistic. I should actually find out what else that they're doing and whether they're being consistent.
But certainly, it's definitely appropriate to be skeptical and hold people accountable and make sure that they're not tokenizing and not just exploiting people at the same time to be part of a quote unquote trend that they think they're trying to do.
Cool. So one of the things that you said at the start was we were talking about empowerment, and I guess adoptee empowerment, feeling empowered, thriving adoptees. What does and you also mentioned about the writing work. Is there a connection there between empowerment as an adoptee and writing? And can you talk a little bit more into that?
Yeah. So I definitely think that, something that is very personally important to me is just advocacy in general, for different social issues. And then adding my personal story to it has been my most recent type of advocacy and activism, just talking about what it's like to be adopted and some of the complexities and nuances that we both know through lived experiences about. So I think writing has certainly been a form of advocacy and feeling like I am, sharing this identity that's so important to me with others, and maybe giving back a little bit what someone else has given to me by letting me read what their lived experiences have been like. So yeah, I definitely think it goes hand in hand, the writing and feeling empowered and thriving in this, you know, narrative.
Where else does the empowerment touch for you? What are the parts in your story?
Yeah, I mean, being a person of color too, I think this is such a almost like funny thing to say, but I know I'm not alone in this. Part of my adoption journey has really been embracing what it's like to be a person of color. And you know, growing up, I don't think I really saw myself as that, as you know, a person of color. I think that being Asian American and looking the way I do, some people will equate like my race as being almost equal to being white, which is not true. And I think it plays part into the model minority. But it's yeah, I think just embracing that I own some privileges that maybe some other races don't, but also there are some things that can be harder, and I do get stereotyped for my race and stigmatized, and just acknowledging that that's not my fault and it's part of a bigger problem, I think was a big turning point in my life.
Yeah. So when we've had other transracial adoptees on the show, some of them have expressed like a confusion. So so I can't. It was another Asian American, I think, who said that she felt. Well, she said that she felt yellow on the outside and white on the inside, and she used this banana metaphor, right? Which I'd never heard before, and it's I think sometimes it's good that we can bring some humor to stuff that's so difficult to, you know, trauma is a dark world, and we need a little bit more humor. But yeah, I wouldn't dare to say that if I hadn't heard it from her, you know, because I want to be, I don't want to bring any of my stuff to the show. But did you, how were you with that identity piece? Was that fairly well resolved for you? What's been your learnings on that journey?
Yeah. I think I continue to learn more about myself and my, you know, how I fit into these larger social constructs every day. So I think I'm certainly feeling more comfortable in my own skin. I think when I was growing up, the banana parallel is funny because I've heard it before as I've started like kind of looking into this transracial adoptee journey. And it makes me laugh because I totally understand where this person is coming from. I think that when you're a person of color and you're in a more white community, it can feel tough because you're not white. But at the same time, you know, that can happen for like people who are mixed race or people who are you know, a person of color just transplanted into a more homogenous town. But when you're adopted, a lot of times, you know, and especially for a transracial adoptee, you don't have your parents to lean back on to tell you about all the nuances of what it's like, or just to be like, yeah, I totally get it, because they don't. And I think it's hard when I was growing up and I would go to places that were more even had more concentrated Asian populations. I felt out of place there as well. So it really kind of felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. And now I think as I've, you know, gone on this journey and learned more about myself and my identity, I just realized that it's kind of a unique and special place to be. And it can be both sometimes lonely in certain settings, but at the same time, it can be really, I don't know, makes me feel more connected to these other adoptees who feel this way as well and who get it. So yeah.
So you talked about being more comfortable in your own skin. Are there particular moments that come to mind, or particular insights that you've had over the years? Or is this more about looking back on it and just say, well, I'm more comfortable than I was then? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah. I wish I could pinpoint like a revelational moment, but it really has kind of been this long and slow journey. I think some of the things that I look back on now, when I was really younger and like in elementary school or maybe even high school, I think I was trying so hard to fit in with my community that I would really build this wall and stray away from anyone else who was Asian, which I definitely look back on and kind of feel a little bit ashamed, a little bit guilty of. And now that I recognize that, I think I, just understand myself a little bit more. I realize like, wow, why did I do that? Oh, maybe it's because I just wasn't comfortable with who I was at the time. So now I don't feel that way anymore. I think that I've been trying very slowly to embrace more of my Asian heritage, and kind of carve out my own place, you know.
A random thought just popped into my head, something I heard on a podcast yesterday from not a an audio book written by a neurosurgeon, I think. And she was talking about the fact that our brains aren't fully formed until we're 25.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering whether, does that might be, like a possible explanation. There's no, that it's just, we're just settling down.
Right. Right.
And I realize that's a pretty random thing to say. So
No, I think it's interesting, as someone in medicine too. And I think so. We had talked about this before we started the recording, but I'm going into a specialty that can care for both kids and adults. And the reason that I'm doing that is because, through this whole journey I've had, I've realized how vital that transition is from what we say kids under 18, but really, I don't know, sometimes I still feel like a kid at like 28, but to adulthood. And it's such a formative period that I think people don't talk about enough. I think, people look at you when you're 18 or 20 and they're like, oh, you're adult, you need to have it all together. And it's just not true. You're still growing every day. And, even as you get older, but I really think that that's such a core period that a lot of, especially adoptees, start to find themselves and have questions. And no one's there to really answer them. Sometimes you kind of have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah. It is significant transitions, clearly, and from school to college, and then college to the workplace, and even like what you call elementary to middle school. That there's some work being done on that area here in the UK on that transition piece, but it's still very, very rudimentary.
Yeah.
Right? These kids are going from a school. So here in the UK, the elementary school's got 180 kids in it, right? The high schools that they go. So we don't have many middle schools here in the UK. I know you guys do in the States. They go from a school of 180 to a school with 1,500 or 2,000 kids in it, and they've gone from the top. They've gone from the biggest kids, sixth grade, 6th year, to the littlest kids, and they're in this huge pot. So those key transitions, I think, are largely speaking, not a lot of focus on them.
Yeah.
The universities, I don't know what. So here in the UK, it's about high school is about getting you to university. And university is about university, and they may have some small careers function, but really you're on your own. The people that run the universities are into research and their own like academic development, from bachelor's to masters, and then professors, all that sort of stuff. So the world outside isn't really their concern.
Yeah. In some ways, I think that the States is very similar to once you go to university here, I guess you're over 18, and they really are prepping you for a degree, and then you kind of go out in the world and try and find yourself by yourself. So
yeah. So one of the two other words that you mentioned at the start of the conversation in terms of what helps us thrive is feeling connected and in community. I guess those kind of things, that those points kind of sits together. Can you give us a little bit of a little bit more depth on that, or breadth about what that's meant for you on your story?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the research study that I had talked to you about. I know it's a little bit of a different kind of type of community, but I guess, like I said, I've been taking little bits and pieces in the time that I have to connect with other adoptees. And I think that something that has really just reinforced the idea of not feeling alone is that study that I had been working on with Dr. Schulte and some other colleagues. And it's, a study on how some of the challenges that adult adoptees adult people who were adopted when they were younger, some of the challenges they've faced when they go to the doctors and just interacting with healthcare. And the study's still open, but we've gotten some really great responses so far, and reading those, I think, has really been just deeply resonating with me. People talking about how it can feel really like isolating or scary to not know your biological family medical history, or just having providers dismiss their concerns related to adoption, or like what their journey was like when they were younger. So I think that has made me feel like some of my worries have not been so crazy, for lack of better words, and just like what I want to be as a future physician, like how I want to build my community of or maybe not build my community, but how I want to interact with my community of people, because you don't know who's adopted unless they disclose it to you. And I think that that's what makes this kind of community both challenging but so beautiful, because it's, if people tell you that they're adopted, then it just gives me a chance to connect with them more. And if they don't want to share, then that's okay too. But I feel like this study has really opened my eyes to how other adoptees feel in general when they go to the doctors. And I'm like really excited to hopefully make them feel empowered in my office and in my practice in the future.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to that normalization thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You realize that other people that have been through the same as us feel the same as us, and we're not alone in feeling that way. And it was Dr. Schulte that brought Julia and I together, and that's Julia was involved in with the interview we did in the summer. So there will be a link, listeners, in the show notes. I just scribbled that down while I'm making my notes. So in the show notes to this episode, we'll do a link back to the episode that you did with Dr. Schulte. And it was interesting for me. Dr. Schulte is actually an adoptive mom, isn't she?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Sure. Yeah. Unless my mind's playing tricks on me.
Oh, you said, I'm sorry, adopted her own, you said? Yes. She has two daughters that she had adopted.
She has two daughters through adoption. Yeah. And the connection with these people that have been doing the research, what's that been? Has that been drawn in from different parts of the states, or is it being focused in your state, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so Dr. Schulte is in New York, and I was connected with her through a physician who works with kids in foster care. And then Dr. Schulte had connected me with Ramya.
Yeah.
And I think Ramya lives in DC or works in DC. I'm not really sure exactly where she resides. So it's kind of dispersed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Ramya, so I should have mentioned earlier on, Ramya's the third person that was involved in the interview we did in the summer with Dr. Schulte and Julia. So I'm you talked about reading other people's stories. Are you talking about other adoptees' stories and memoirs? Can you
Yeah.
share some of what you've learned from that?
Yeah. Oh man, I wish I was trying to tell someone else about this wonderful book. I cannot remember the name for the life of me, but if I remember it, I'll email it to you.
Yeah, great.
But it's compilation of specifically transracial adoptees' narratives, and it's just like short stories and tidbits about their lived experiences. And I think there was things that I learned about other people of color that I just like never would have known was so important to them. So I think it was just so eye-opening for me. Um, One of the stories I distinctly remember, it was this young Black girl who was adopted, and I think she had a sibling who's also Black in this home. And she was talking about how her adoptive mom was trying to do her younger sibling's hair, and was just, hair is so important in Black culture. And um it was, the mom just did not know how to do it, and the girl was just snapped, like she was so upset about it. And her mom just didn't understand, and just talking about how important that was to her, I think was so interesting to me. And I think about how when I was in grade school, people would talk about my hair, which is, it's not the same as having Black hair, but I can use hair products that don't have to be as specific, but people really almost not fetishizing, but kind of like so intrigued by like my straight Black hair, and like, yeah, kids, always talking about it. And I remember thinking that, oh, this was supposed to be a compliment, but it kind of feels weird that everyone's like paying so much attention to that, or to like my tan skin, which I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but it's kind of like a cool thing to have more tan skin, and things like that. And I remember it just kind of being weird that people always pointing it out and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah. This goes back to it's kind of related to the I think it's kind of related to the royal family back in the day, right?
yeah.
Years ago. So where the British people would go to the aristocracy and the royal family would go to these places, springs, like they would go to spa towns. So
Yeah.
Harrogate, near where I live, in the spa town, Bath, these beautiful Georgian places,
Mhm.
and so everybody would aspire to go to these places.
Yeah.
And then when the royal family started going abroad, right? So
Mhm.
this is you would be that would be part of the thing. You would be
Mhm.
aspiring to be like them, and
Right.
even like Christmas trees, right?
Mhm.
So like a fir tree in your house, that comes from the German royal family. So
Mhm.
whenever it was, late 1800s, early 1900s, when Queen Victoria was reigning in power, right? She was on the throne. She had a German husband, and the royal they sent over the Christmas trees. So
Mhm.
Christmas trees became associated. It was a German tradition. They got then it was associated by London, by the
Mhm.
royal family, then by London society, and then everybody else wanting to be like them. So it's like a
Mhm.
cultural transmission
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
time, and the idea that you've been away on holiday is
Mhm.
you can afford to go away on holiday.
Right.
Good
Right.
time.
Kind of.
So there's
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff on the back of that. But then we see the flip of that. So
Mhm.
we used to go on holiday to an island in the Mediterranean called Malta, which is kind of near Sicily. And there, if you are a higher class, right,
Mhm.
you are paler because you don't work
Yeah.
outside.
Right.
So
Right.
it just flips it.
Yeah.
It's
A
just full
status
of
thing.
stuff. It's full
Yeah.
of cultural stuff.
It's funny. Because I think in Asian culture, especially Eastern Asian, it's more of a status quo if you have paler skin. And my mom, my adoptive mom, she it was, I don't know where she was with me, but even as a baby, I had more tan skin. And she was talking to this person who was Asian, and I guess she had told her, oh, like my daughter's adopted, whatnot. And she had said something along the lines of this other woman was said something like, oh, she's so tan, she must have come from a poor family. So I was like, I just think it's interesting. It's just different, you know?
Yeah, well, it's about working outside and
Right.
stereotypes and social norms in the different culture that we're coming
Yeah.
in. Yeah. So just looking back, the you talked about those nuggets that you picked up from the compilation of transracial adoptees. Do any other ones stick out for you, Julia?
Um, like take home messages, you mean, or stories, or
Yeah, yeah, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think like the take home that I've at least taken away is just uh recognizing, like I said before, one, that I'm not alone in how I'm feeling, but two, kind of feeling, recognizing that I kind of straddle two different races, you know, culturally feeling kind of white from my family, and racially like presenting Asian and having this Asian heritage that I'm trying to get back in touch with, and just kind of being sitting in that and being proud of it, but also recognizing that um there's complexities to it. Like it can be hard and it can feel lonely to feel a little bit misunderstood and to feel in this minority within a minority. So I think that's what these kind of books and writings have been about. At least to me, it was realizing how complex all this can be, and whatever you're feeling in the moment is probably not a feeling that you're feeling alone. And just feeling, you know, proud to be there, but also recognizing it's hard and all of these things.
yeah. So what you mentioned that you're looking to become more connected with the Asian part
Yeah.
of who you are. What sort of things are you doing in that regard?
Yeah. Well, before COVID, I was really hoping. So, since I'm in medical school, when I started medical school, that was when the height of COVID happened, or when it first began, unfortunately. So, prior to that, I really wanted to go back to China where I was adopted and kind of see what it was like. That, you know, at the time, travel was not a possibility. So I think right now funds and timing is also a little bit limiting, but I would really love to go back and kind of see where I was born. I had asked my mom to pull out some of like the adoption records, and um, I'm hoping once things kind of settle a little bit more with school that I can go through them and just kind of understand a little bit more about my birth and what it was like, and you know, even little things like how much did I weigh, or what was my first doctor appointment like in the US, things like that. So I think I've been trying to just understand my roots a little bit more that way.
And are you aware whether you were adopted from a family or an orphanage? And was this under the one child only rule? What do you know much about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's really not a lot of information. So, I believe I was adopted from an orphanage. The company that my family had gone through is now closed. It was a very small, like, uh, family owned company in Massachusetts. It wasn't kind of one of these bigger organizations, which in some ways, I think when I asked my parents about it, they said that they did that because they wanted it to feel more like a special moment, not like this corporate transaction almost. But in other ways, I think since the company was so small and it obviously unfortunately closed, but you miss out on some of the resources and some of the supports and other things that these larger companies have. So, you know, thinking about those things, I think it's a give and take. But yeah, I think we'll kind of see. I'm hoping to learn more from these papers. I think a lot of them are in Mandarin, so we'll see it. I'll have to do some Google translating, but
So there's obviously quite a lot, as you say, quite a lot that of unknowns there, but you seem to be fairly at peace with that. It's just hearing about, is that the case? Or?
Yeah, I think I fluctuate. I think, it's some days I'm like, it would be great to know more. I'd love, as someone in the medical field, to know a little bit more about my family history. But at the same time, I think it's, I am at peace. I don't know. I think that's an area where I'm still growing and learning. Some days I do think it's harder than others to, my mom had told me that when she adopted me, my birth weight was or the weight she adopted me at was pretty low, which I was surprised to hear. And again, in being in the medical field, my brain is just turning and running loose. I'm like, I wonder why. Like, was I malnourished? Was I not taken care of? Was I born early? Were there genetic problems? Things like that. So, maybe this is showing that I'm not as at peace as originally as I said, but I think as I get more information, I'm just trying to deal with it as it comes.
Yeah. The reason I'm looking away, if you're wondering why I'm looking away, I'm looking for the name of the book that I'm reading, not something else. That may shed some light on that. Actually, it's something that, I mean, I've been looking at identity and consciousness and our emotions. I've been kind of fascinated with that stuff for about 16 years. But I still find new stuff. And so I heard somebody on a podcast, I heard this author, so this author's great. So I bought his book. He's an American guy. He's a neuroscientist as well. I think in that area. He's a professor. He's called Chris Niebauer. I'll put a link in and his book's called No Self, No Problem. And it talks about the two parts of the brain, left brain and the right brain. And the left brain is the one that is that's the source of all our questions, right? It's the rational thing. And the right one is the one that's in charge of all our creative, that's running our creative show. And basically is saying that the self is a left brain. It's a left brain phenomenon.
Yeah.
So, but we're shifting. We have a bias. Each person has a bias between left and right brain, but obviously we both got left and right brain. But when we're looking for answers, and when when I'm spinning circles, when my mind's going round and round and round and round, that's left brain activity. Whereas when I'm doing this, having this conversation with you, I'm just focused in on the moment, or I'm writing up a blog post, I'm focused on writing. When you're focused on you're doing your writing or you're studying, you kind of, the left brain is just treading water, and the right brain is the one that's coming out with handling all this stuff. So that's why we sometimes feel.
Yeah.
That's why it fluctuates. Well, that's why it fluctuates for me. And I thought, geez, I've been looking at this stuff for 16 years.
Yeah.
This Chris Niebauer book makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I wonder if some of this person's work is very similar to, I don't know if you've heard of EMDR. I forget what it stands for. It looks like
I have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. I had tried EMDR for a different reason when I was in therapy, and tough relationships growing up and things like that with a boy. It was very silly, but EMDR is the idea of, having the two lateralizing sides in your brain and trying to help it cross to the other side a little bit quicker, and helping to think about tough events, not forgetting them, but just looking at them more at peace, or without feeling so overwhelmed by them. So I think it's, I'd love to read that book. I think it's very interesting, and I loved EMDR. I thought it was very helpful in that idea of kind of letting things flow back and forth and recognizing there's two sides, will kind of do different things.
Yeah. I mean, I saw somebody, so I referred earlier on to Harrogate, the spa town, right? So it's close to us, like 10, 12 miles from here. And I don't know many local adoptees, and this guy I only know from Facebook, but he's a local adoptee. And he was saying that he'd been doing some EMDR and found it really useful. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. So I asked him if he'd recommend his therapist. So we've done 3 sessions now, but we've been doing more feeling work, and I think we're going to go do some EMDR at some point. But she just goes with the flow, and she fixes the
right,
and she goes with where she feels. She has different tools, I guess, in her.
Yeah.
What did you look? What were the things that you learned through through the therapy? You said that was related. That was relationship stuff, was it?
Yeah, I had been with a guy who was not that great for me, and it was, I think I learned a lot about relationships, and I think one of the things that maybe is connected to me and my adoption identity and just feeling like I didn't fit in, as sometimes I felt like when I was growing up I was having a little bit of trouble either connecting too much with people and getting kind of stuck on relationships or not wanting to at all. So I think that this woman, she was very helpful processing this one not great relationship and recognizing that not all relationships will be like that. And again, I think maybe the big takeaway for me over all these years has been saying that some of these things aren't my fault, with how I'm treated, either by being transracial person or just being in a not great relationship that I couldn't control. All of those things is just coming to peace with, like, hey, there's a bigger system at play, and it's not always, a burden on my own shoulders.
Yeah. It's amazing how our left brains try to categorize stuff, right? So I think about my relationship stuff in my teens and early 20s before I met my wife, and I think, was that an adoption issue or wasn't that an adoption issue? And it's really impossible to sometimes, I think, to pin this stuff down.
I agree. I think that, I think therapy is wonderful, and I've had a few different therapists over the years. And some are really, really great about the adoption thing. And sometimes I think, like you were saying, it's really hard to tease apart what is related to being adopted and what's related to something else. And I've found that it's almost a little bit frustrating and almost seems like you're being dismissed with some people either trying to say this is only related to being adoption and you're like this because you're adopted, or me trying to say, like, oh, I think this is part of this part of me, and they're like, no, it must be, it's not because you're adopted. I had one therapist who maybe we didn't connect as well, and I was trying to tell her about what it's like to be a transracial adopted person, and she was like, well, is that just because you're a person of color? It doesn't have anything to do with being adopted. And I was like, no, I don't think that's true. I think they go hand in hand. And I think that there's this idea in like diversity, equity, inclusion. There's something called like intersectionality, which I think is so important. And it's the idea of that everyone holds multiple different social groupings or identities, and they all come together to make something that is vastly different than if you separate them apart. So it's just recognizing that people aren't just, you can't boil them down to one thing. And, all of the things come together to make your experiences and who you are.
Yeah. Something that I got speaking to the therapist last week about this stuff, about that issue, causality, what is the cause? And she encouraged me to, because my left brain wants to categorize. it is adoption or it isn't adoption. And she's made me realize again the futility of doing that.
Yeah.
And that it's not as simple as that. And I think something that I shared on social media a few months ago, I saw this quote, somebody else had shared it, and it was about if you think you're going backwards, you're not going wrong. It's just another chance to learn the same thing at a deeper level.
I like that.
So, and I thought that's great, because I've been playing this categorization game, is this or isn't this? And then you think it's done, but it kind of it comes back, and I think that's probably what the left brain does, right? It comes back, it comes back, and it comes back. And we think that's I think that's a sign of going backwards, but it isn't. It's just the old habitual thought popping back. It's never once and done. It's an ever deepening lesson. So people talk about climbing the ladder of consciousness. A mentor of mine says it's more like falling down the stairs, and you realize that you've made a mistake, and that you've been mistaken in your thinking, right? And it hurts. It's not some glory, it's some glorious path. It's more like a series of Homer Simpson things where you just go dope and like, oh, you think
right.
So that's why I had reading this Chris Niebauer book, right? This left and right brain stuff. I thought, how could I've heard that before, but I've never thought it in that way. And again, this categorization thing. So I think what the therapist said was, so I was looking, it's either or, and she said, well, maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. And these things, rather than being two separate categories, they are things that stack upon each other. So I sometimes think of adoption trauma, if you like, but for want of a better word, it being like a layers of cake. So different people have different layers. Different layers have different thicknesses. So we've both got the relinquishment bit, right? So that comes into play, right? You've got the orphanage bit, right? I haven't, and the lack of, because traditionally it wasn't a one-to-one relationship in an orphanage. So sometimes there's that lack of human touch and lack of human touch and lack of human contact, which may be, why connectedness is bigger for you, who knows, right?
Maybe.
But then we've got we've got the stuff that happened whilst we're in the womb. We've got all the stress, cortisol running through our mother's wombs, because they know they're going to have to give us up. Then we've got the relinquishment. Then before that, then they've got the orphanage bit. I've got a bit of short-term foster care. Then hopefully our lives have been kind of okay since then within the adoptive families. But then you've had a bit of grief from this one guy who wasn't good for you. As you said, I had some bullying stuff that went on. I had some relationship stuff, and these kind of, they add on top of it. And then the layer of the cake that I've forgotten to mention, and it's the obvious one, is the kind of the identity issue to do with transracial adoption. So different. Just for me, it's an easy way to look at, and this isn't. Those are layers of a cake that add up. To a trauma. They make the whole person, look at the whole person, rather than it being categorizations.
Right.
It adds up.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great analogy. That we're more complex than just one layer.
Yeah.
So,
And who doesn't like cake, right? Who doesn't
right? Everyone
like
loves cake.
you know, you know, I think of the books, the titles, the titles, the adoption books just really freak me out. Like this, the trauma one called "The Body Keeps the Score," right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
the body keeps the score, and I'm thinking it's a score that's going to be settled. And it feels a threat. It feels ominous. It feels doom laden, rather than your body is going to tell you. Your body is going to alert you to some pre-verbal trauma that isn't that you have us our bodies are going to inform us when we get that horrible sick feeling in the pit of our stomach, where we have loads of nerve endings. We have loads of nerve endings, don't we? In our plexus,
it's very complex.
So that's telling us that some pre-verbal trauma that we haven't consciously processed yet, because we haven't got words for it. It's showing us that we're going off kilter, isn't? So rather than the body keeps the score, wouldn't it be your body is telling you stuff that you don't know, and so it's on our side rather than some kind of bad guy that's going to jump out and settle our score with us.
Right. Yeah, I have heard of that book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but yeah, I think everything that you're talking about is very interesting. I'm working with the doctor who connected me with Dr. Schulte. She is like an expert, renowned expert in trauma-informed care. And she talks about that idea of how, in traumatic situations, which can be anything, it can be from seeing a car crash or seeing a hurricane or having adoption or something that is considered very traumatizing to you and your body, and how your body responds in all of these different ways. It can be fight or flight or freeze. And even if you don't have, once you have that over and over, having any small kind of triggers like that, you can get that kind of stomach drop feeling because your body remembers it's trying to protect you. So, I think that even if there is no danger left, sometimes one of the biggest things in trauma-informed care is the idea that if you've been exposed to all of these scary things, and your body keeps remembering it, that even when the danger is gone, that your body sometimes continues to try and protect you when it's actually safe, but you don't know. And that's when you get all of these kind of different reactivities or different reactions or habits that can sometimes maybe not serve you as well when it's safe, but it's understandable why you still have them. So it's all of those things, just, thinking back and going over it and lateralizing your brain and trying to understand it all really just helps you come to peace with it all.
Yeah, that's what we want, the peace. And the peace is in the peace is in the right brain, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Julia, thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating talking to you again. Just before we bring it in, is there anything else that you'd like to share whilst you're on?
No, I just thank you so much for having me. And, I'm excited to hear some of your more of your shows, and congrats on all the success that you've had so far.
Thank you. It's all down to the guests, right? So, well, it takes two to tango, as you say.
Yes.
Thanks, Julia. And we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you, listeners. Cheers now.